Now, to further discuss the Assange saga, we go live to our expert panel. We have former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, editor at grayzone.com Max Blumenthal, and Eric Sirotkin, author and human rights lawyer. Everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this ruling on Assange's fate, I mean, he's been evading arrest for years in the Ecuadorian embassy, and it's been over a year since he was actually arrested. I want to ask all of you, maybe we could start with Max Blumenthal. Was this a surprising decision to you?
It was a truly surprising decision because, you know, I expected a judge who we knew so little about, who had ruled so often in support of the British security state, to simply be a rubber stamp. And what was interesting about it to me was the way that the judge's decision essentially endorsed the entire narrative of the U.S. national security state vis-a-vis Assange and the 2010 cables and WikiLeaks as a whole, including the right of the CIA to spy on Assange. And at the same time, they seemed to find a way of saving face by deciding that Assange was indeed a suicide risk. And the judge issued this stunning indictment of the U.S. federal prison system, a site where Assange could be potentially tortured, and found that Nils Melzer's testimony and his findings through his interviews with Assange were in fact correct. That's what really stunned me, but it was seemingly a face-saving gesture for a British security state that refused to invalidate the U.S. Department of Justice's whole narrative against Assange.
Well, Ray, what do you think about the decision? Do you agree with Max there, or do you maybe have a different take? Is it surprising to you?
I would too, was surprised. And of course, what cries out for explanation is why Barica changed her mind. Now, what happened since last year? Well, we're going to have a new president. So I don't think it's an analytical leap to suggest that Biden, well, I put myself in Biden's place. Do I want this mess coming into the United States? This despicable act where people can't defend themselves, where the CIA will be shown to have interfered with lawyers and others, where that terrible tape on collateral murder will be shown endlessly about what our troops did in Iraq. Now, I don't need that. Tell Barica to let him off. I think that's what happened. I think he wanted to wash his hands of it. And of course, the premise of this, I think, is valid, and that is that the British are pretty much a vassal state of the United States. Barica's not going to do what she wants. She's not going to do what the British authorities want. She's going to do what the British authorities tell her that the U.S. wants. And I think that explains why she changed her mind. I'm delighted. This is not a new chapter. This is a new book. Assange is going to be free on Wednesday. My only concern now is not the appeal. My only concern now is that he not be assassinated like so many people who the United States doesn't like.
And Eric, what's your 2 cents on this?
You know, we're at such a pivotal time where news and truth and getting out information is so necessary. And we've just gone through a tsunami of cover-ups and false statements and direct lies within the United States administration over the past 4 years. And so what one hopes that can come from this is a delay, a slight delay in the process to, as Ray says, to allow a new president to come in who may take a different view of this. Because in the new administration, despite some of the comments by Biden that you rolled in your story before and all of that, this is going to become a huge distraction. Because what isn't being shown is to talk about the war crimes and the horrific things that were disclosed in those documents that are shameful and that put the United States at risk all around the world because of its conduct, not because of the disclosures. And so consequently, we're going to be reliving these disclosures in the months and years ahead. And if the United States is going to go after journalists, which have been the Trump administration's been doing for the last few years viciously in public sometimes, we are going to need to support freedom of the press. And I think this case represents what do we do when people expose wrongdoing? And where does national security and secrecy override basic human dignity, human rights, and morality? And that balance that we're up against right now is our pivotal issues for the years ahead. And perhaps this delay, as judges like to put things off if they can, is pretty common. They, at that point, putting this off, it may allow a new administration to say, this is not a battle we need at this point.
The judge ruled out arguments that the case is politically motivated, right? While Assange's supporters say that this is clearly has political grounds, where do you see the truth lying?
Well, I think this is part of the complex here. The trial, so to speak, or the hearing was a charade. It was a disgrace. British law says that there will be no extradition to the United States if it's a political problem. And everything about that trial showed that it was a political problem. So for Baraitser to say, well, that doesn't matter, the whole thing was such a travesty that I could see, if I were Joe Biden, I wouldn't want that coming over this side of the Atlantic and showing all these miscarriages of justice in our courts. So in my view, Biden is well rid of them. And that, Biden was around when this came up before. The First Amendment may be of some importance to him. Let's concede the fact that he and Obama and the Attorney General, Eric Holder at the time, did not prosecute Assange precisely because of what they call the New York Times problem. Namely, if you're going to prosecute Assange, you're going to have to prosecute the New York Times. That was a bridge too far, and thank goodness it looks like the First Amendment may have been given a new life, given the fact that the British are sparing us from having to do this, mostly because I'm convinced the U.S. told them to do this, and Assange profits from this. Julian is a friend of mine, so I have a personal stake in this, and I can't wait until Wednesday when it is fully expected that he'll be free.
Max, what do you make of what Assange has been through over the last decade or so? What do you make of how he was treated? How is he held up?
I think Stella Morris made a remarkable statement today in her press conference. This is Julian Assange's longtime partner and also a member of his legal team, when she said that U.S. agents proposed assassinating Julian Assange on British soil. And that relates to an investigation I carried out at the Gray Zone based on information, documents, protected witness testimonies I gathered through a trial that's taking place in Madrid in the National Court of a CIA contractor, David Morales, who through his firm, UC Global, spied on Julian Assange by infiltrating the Ecuadorian embassy. Not only did he spy on Assange, according to protected witness testimony, he proposed to his employees poisoning Assange. There were also proposals of kidnapping Assange. His partner, Stella Morris, was specifically targeted, followed. His legal team was followed. It appears his lead legal counsel had his office broken into. This all took place under the watch of Mike Pompeo's CIA. So Ray is absolutely correct that Biden would not want this to come back home and these investigations to go from the gray zone to the media that's ignored it. And beyond that, the CIA contractor, UC Global, was also spying on reporters from the Washington Post and other mainstream publications who had come to meet with Julian Assange. So just imagine if Russia's FSB or China's security services had done this to U.S. reporters or had plotted to poison a dissident in their countries. It would have been front page news. And now it seems like the security state wants to bury all of this. And that is one reason, I think, for the ruling, that there is just so much misconduct, spying on his lawyers, violation of attorney-client privilege, and again, the assassination plot. And I think we should know more about this. And our media has displayed enormous dereliction of duty by burying these stories so far.
Well, Eric, this next question is for you. I wanted to hear your opinion on a bit of the nature of the judge's decision here. I mean, the decision was based solely on the WikiLeaks founder's mental health, right? The judge rejected the defense's freedom of speech argument. So, number one, what implications do you think this has for press freedom? And if Assange's mental health improves, do you think that that could lead to a future extradition?
Well, first of all, I think it was very interesting. The judge, as was pointed out, raised questions about the federal prison system in the United States and the impact on mental health, which is a dialogue we're having here, people within prisons and outside, about the mental health impact on those within such institutions. And I believe the international community looks at the prison rate and other things in the United States with quite a bit of astonishment. And so I believe that the judge's ruling on a more narrow ground buys some time. I think it raises certain questions from a humanitarian standpoint, which I think is good. But really, we have to look at, are courts the places that these kinds of issues around freedom of expression and such should be dealing with? The courts should be dealing with these issues. In reality, I worked in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as international project there. And there we learned that there are other processes to deal with truth. And these issues of attacks, poisoning, killing, assassinations, the kind of things that come out when secrets are divulged really impact us as a world. And we need more truth, and we need to reconcile what happened in Iraq, what happened in Afghanistan, and what is still happening. And we need to deal with these things in a constructive fashion. And merely because disclosure took place of truth, even though it was truth that no one in the government wanted disclosed, doesn't mean that this is espionage of warranting 175 years in prison. There are both sides who need to be held accountable here. And how will that happen in this process? And you can bet a trial going forward is going to bring a lot of that out. And I think that that could be a reason to look forward and not back. But I don't think we should sweep under the rugs what was disclosed by WikiLeaks and just focus on the disclosure and not the allegations that shocked the world.
Ray, this next question is actually for you as well. The U.S. has already said it will appeal the decision, as we were talking about before. Do you think it's likely that Washington will get its hands on him after all, even after this decision?
I know that the U.S. immediately said they would appeal. And I'm no lawyer. But my guess is that as the new administration takes hold, they will see more merit in letting the whole thing wash away rather than appeal. Because, number one, it's going to be more embarrassment. And number two, even if the British court system is as free with the truth as they've shown themselves to be so far, there's a European court. And in my view, there's no way that the European court on appeal would uphold this kind of treatment of Julian Assange.
Mm-hmm. Well, Eric, as a lawyer, what do you think? If the extradition appeal succeeds, do you think Julian Assange will receive a fair trial in the U.S.?
I think it's difficult based upon the charges and the specific proofs you have to make to receive a fair trial by a jury of his peers in the U.S. I think that courts limit what can come in, what kinds of things can be heard, what can't be heard. That complicates the presentation of evidence in trial. And I believe that it's in the political nature of the accusations and the impact on freedom of the press makes it a very difficult case to get a fair trial. Now, that being said, you can put on a defense and a case, even though the Espionage Act doesn't have a political purpose type of exception, You can try cases to jury, and there's a concept called jury nullification, and it means that regardless, a jury can make a decision in favor of someone in essentially the public interest if the case is tried with that angle, as I'm sure it will be. And so can you get a unanimous jury to convict him of espionage when acting with a journalistic intent is going to become a fascinating issue for a trial, and one that the fairness might come from that jury if we can't get it through the courts.
Mm-hmm. Well, Max, with this new ruling, do you think it's possible that Assange could be released on bail this Wednesday? What do you think?
Well, I really have no insight into any expert insight into the British legal system or the specifics of who is overseeing the case at Old Bailey, except that I was able to report based on testimony and photographs provided to me by witnesses of these hearings that a group of American men in dark suits were seated behind the British prosecution and were whispering in their ears and meeting with them in the halls, and that these were essentially Department of Justice officials who were stage managing the British prosecution, and that the British and American prosecutors were basically one hand. I know that the American prosecutor who's going to be appealing this decision is Gordon Kromberg, an authoritarian fanatic who presided over so many of the post-9/11 sham prosecutions of Muslim civil society leaders in the U.S., including, I think, the Holy Land Foundation, one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in recent American history. And he is someone who has displayed no ability for moderation. He is dead set on prosecuting Julian Assange. However, as Ray said, and Ray's absolutely right, this is going to be very damaging to American soft power. It's going to be difficult for Biden administration to preside over this kind of prosecution. And we're starting to see elements of the establishment media and establishment NGOs, press freedom organizations, which had been muted on Julian Assange, largely due to his demonization by the press. They're starting to speak up for him, and they're starting to say this is an attack on all of us. I can name so many mainstream figures who surprisingly spoke up for him in the past week and said anyone who does national security journalism in the U.S. could be targeted next. This is about our most cherished part of the Constitution, the First Amendment. So I just don't think that Biden wants to preside over this, but we'll see what happens on Wednesday. I do believe ultimately Julian Assange will be a free man, but he should be released immediately. The conditions in a maximum security prison in London are not much better than those in the U.S., so I fail to see the case for holding him there and still continuing to abuse him psychologically and physically.
Right. Well, then there's always the possibility, right, that a Biden administration won't have to preside over this. I wanted to ask Ray, what do you think about the chance that the current president, Donald Trump, will pardon Julian Assange before he leaves the White House?
You're asking me to predict the unpredictable. I mean, there are all kinds of arguments why he should, but my God, don't ask me to predict what Donald Trump is going to do.
Does anyone have any projections about that? Do you think it's likely he'll go one way or the other, or?
I think one problem for
I
Julian
think it's
Assange
highly unlikely.
So sorry, maybe we could hear from Eric, and then Max will hear your opinion as well.
Yeah, I think it's highly unlikely. I think that in this scenario, Trump and his alleged political aspirations in the future and what he's doing, he's going to pardon people who fit his dialogue about persecution because of Donald Trump and association with Donald Trump. And he is going to, he doesn't have a broad way of looking at this and view this as international abuse or otherwise, or they wouldn't have been seeking his extradition so incredibly, with such incredible fury. It really seems to me that it's highly unlikely, and I believe that the people we see being pardoned in the years will relate to internal political Republican favors, will relate to Donald Trump and people he could say were the persecuted like him. And I don't think that Julian Assange fits that scenario.
What do you think, Max? Do you have a similar take, or what do you have to say?
Yeah, it's similar. I think the problem for Julian Assange is he was not a one-time Trump business partner or the mercenary firm owning brother of Trump's education secretary, Eric Prince. He wasn't an employee of Eric Prince randomly shooting Iraqis in Nisour Square. So that makes it difficult for him to get on Trump's radar. It was remarkable, though, to see people like Sarah Palin actually speak out for Julian Assange, while figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez declared that there are concerns about pardoning him. The political left, or what passes for it in the United States, has been very muted. And we've seen remarkable developments, for example, in Mexico, with President Andrés Manuel López Obrador actually offering to give sanctuary to Julian Assange, to take him in. This is a president of a country that's historically been allied with the U.S., but he's acting in the tradition of Lázaro Cárdenas, former Mexican president in the 1930s who sheltered Latin American revolutionaries and persecuted Spanish Republicans, who helped free Fidel Castro from Batista's prison. And so Julian Assange has summoned so many of these new currents of resistance to empire, and it's going to be interesting to see where he winds up, because as Ray pointed out, there are significant concerns about Julian Assange's physical safety living in a country like Australia, which, you know, is his home country. It's where he's a citizen, and which has been essentially annexed by the U.S. national security state. I would be very worried if I were Assange walking around in a place like Melbourne or Canberra, continuing to do the work that he's done, reporting on the national security state.
Well, Ray, I wanted to ask you, maybe we could talk a little bit about, you know, like Max mentioned, the Mexican president's invitation for asylum if Assange needs that. What do you think? Do you think Assange will take him up on that offer if he has the opportunity? And what do you think about the possibility of, you know, he might be elected out of office, and what's the possibility of a right-winger coming into power and then Assange being, you know, hung out to dry like in the Ecuadorian embassy in London when the administration changed? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm sure that Assange and his closest advisors are piecing through all this right now. They're very bright people. They will get offers. My concern is an immediate one. What happens if and when he is released on Wednesday? After all, Barica has dismissed, she's dismissed it. She's sort of freed him. So I do expect he'll be free on Friday. What happens then? You know, maybe we need a UN peacekeeping unit to come in and surround him, lest he be droned to death or otherwise targeted for assassination by whomever. I mean, it sounds crazy to be speaking about these things, but I've been there. I've been in that embassy, and I've seen how he's been treated, and I know he's enemy number one, from Pompeo to anyone. So my immediate concern is that that he not go out of Belmarsh without a security detail that is equipped to take on anyone. And when I say take on anyone, I include the Venezuelan chief of state, who they attempted to drone kill to death. So it sounds to me crazy to be saying these things, but that's the new reality here. There are lots of people that really hate Julian for the truth that he spread around, and he's got to be really careful.
Well, just a couple more questions here.
You know,
this one,
I think
oh, sorry, go ahead, Eric. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think their goal is to debilitate him, not to try him, and they've been succeeding at that. His mental state and his ability to hurt him in the future is probably been damaged to some degree, obviously. And so I think that I don't think the assassination type scenario serves them either. They just want to neuter the messenger, if you will, and I think that will begin to give an opportunity for there to be other people who become enemy number one. I think he's going to be off their radar pretty quick.
Well, Eric, this is a good bridge to this next question I wanted to ask you. Say the U.S. appeal fails. What do you think is going to be next for Julian Assange?
Well, if the U.S. Appeal fails, then there's going to be more time and more delay because it's just the judge hasn't released. At that point, he's got to find safe haven. He's got to be safe somewhere. Because you can't assume always that someone's not going to try again to take those steps to get him on U.S. soil. But in reality, if the appeal fails, then there's a waiting period. There's a get him treatment. I mean, one reason to secure his release at this point, I think, also is a justification is to receive the mental health, appropriate mental health treatment that he needs. And that's a pretty strong argument to be on the outside rather than the inside. So I suspect that if the appeal fails, that we will begin to see this issue, I think, slip out of the dialogue and further back, and new administration coming in, wanting to look forward. There's just no reason that this can't subside and he could be maybe not always safe, but peaceful somewhere where he could be with his family and such.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think that the appeal is going to go forward under Biden. That's pretty clear to me. What worries me, and what we saw today, early this morning, when Baritza's decision was announced, what was Julian's reaction? None. One could argue that the security state in Britain, as well as the United States, has already succeeded in damaging my friend Julian Assange, perhaps irretrievably, hopefully not. But one would have thought there would be some sort of reaction when Baritza announced that he was not to be extradited. His wife, of course, or his partner, of course, burst into tears, and everyone else had an emotional reaction. Julian's was. So I worry about that, and I think people need to know what has befallen Julian, and that the UN rapporteur for torture has declared officially that Julian has been a subject of torture, and that he's been illegally detained for go on 10 years now, and that at the first part of your program this evening, when you talked about the Swedish allegations of sexual misconduct, the UN rapporteur for torture, who speaks fluent Swedish, reviewed those documents and found them to be fraudulent. Fraudulent. This is a classic intelligence technique to smear somebody, to get them into custody, which succeeded now for 10 years. I hope it's over on Wednesday.